It was a busy Tuesday evening inside the Velvet Note, a high-end bistro known more for its expensive wine list than its food. The air inside was thick, filled with the smell of roasted garlic, fresh coffee, the heavy scent of expensive perfume worn by the wealthy patrons. Isabella moved through the crowded tables like a ghost, trying her best to be invisible. She carried a large, heavy tray loaded with 3 pasta dishes and 2 glasses of red wine balanced precariously on the edge. Her feet throbbed inside her worn-out non-slip shoes. She had been on her feet for nearly 6 hours already, and her shift had barely reached the halfway point. She reached table 4, forcing a bright smile onto her face, even though her cheeks hurt from doing it all night. "Here is your linguine, sir," she said, setting the plate down gently in front of a man in a crisp gray suit. The man didn't even look up. He was too busy shouting into his phone, arguing about stocks or margins or something that mattered very little to her. He just waved his hand dismissively, treating her like she was part of the furniture. Isabella was used to it. In this world, she was just the person who brought the food. She cleared her throat, placed the other meals down, and turned away to head back toward the kitchen. On her way, she passed by the large window that looked out onto the street. The rain was pouring down, blurring the lights of the passing cars. She watched for a split second, imagining herself out there, going home to a warm apartment and a soft bed. But that wasn't her reality. Her reality was checking her watch and realizing she still had 3 hours left. She needed the tips. Every dollar counted. When Isabella pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, the noise hit her like a wall. Pots were clanging, the chef was yelling orders, and the dishwasher was humming loudly. It was chaos. She placed her empty tray on the rack and grabbed a rag to wipe her hands. Her manager, a stressed-out man named Mr. Higgins, rushed by her. "Isabella, table 7 needs water. Table 9 is asking for the check. Move it," he barked, not stopping to look at her.
"Ow."
"On it," she whispered. She didn't have the energy to shout back. She filled a pitcher with ice water and took a deep breath. For just a moment, she leaned against the cold metal counter and closed her eyes. She tried to block out the noise of the kitchen. Instead, she listened to the music in her head. It was a habit she had developed over the last 2 years. In her mind, she wasn't in a hot, greasy kitchen. She was in a large, quiet hall. She could hear the clear, pure sound of a piano. She could feel the smooth, cool ivory keys under her fingertips. She could hear the complex chords of a Chopin nocturne filling the air. It felt so real that for a second, her fingers actually twitched, playing an invisible melody on the counter. Isabella opened her eyes and looked down at her hands. They were red and rough from the constant washing and the hot water. Her nails were cut short because long nails got in the way of her work. These were not the hands of a pianist anymore. They were the hands of a tired waitress. But deep down, buried under the exhaustion and the stress, she was still a musician. 2 years ago, her life was completely different. She was a student at the city's most prestigious music conservatory. She was one of the top students in her class, the kind of player that teachers stopped talking to listen to. She had scholarships, invitations to summer programs, and a future that seemed as bright as a spotlight. Music was her language. It was how she understood the world. But life has a way of changing the script without asking for permission. It happened during her sophomore year. Her father, who had always been her biggest fan, suddenly got sick. It was a fast and aggressive illness that emptied his savings in a matter of weeks. Then, when he passed away, he didn't leave behind insurance. He left behind a mountain of medical bills and a funeral Isabella couldn't afford. The scholarships covered her tuition, but they didn't cover the rent or the electricity or the pile of debts her father left behind. Isabella had tried to juggle it all for a month. She would go to classes in the morning, practice for 4 hours, and then run to work until midnight. But she was young, and the grief was heavy. She started falling asleep during practice sessions. Her grades slipped. She missed a crucial recital because she had to pick up an extra shift to pay for the heating bill. Finally, the head of the department called her into his office. He was kind, but he was firm. He told her that her playing had lost its spark. He said she looked like a ghost of herself. He told her to take a year off. "Go fix your life," he had said. The piano will always be here, so she left. She packed up her sheet music and her dreams, and she moved into a smaller apartment. She took the job at the Velvet Note because the tips were good. She told herself it was just a pause, a gap year. She told herself she would go back soon. But months turned into a year, and a year turned into 2. The debt was slowly going down, but the fear was going up. She was terrified that she had lost it. She was terrified that if she sat down at a piano today, her hands wouldn't know what to do. A loud crash from the dining room snapped her out of her thoughts. "Isabella, we need water out here." A coworker shouted. She grabbed the pitcher and pushed through the doors. Back into the noise. Back into the smells. She weaved through the tables, serving water to a group of women who were laughing loudly about a vacation they had just taken. Isabella smiled, nodded, and retreated as she walked back toward the service station. Her eyes drifted, as they always did, to the corner of the room. There, sitting in a spotlight, was a beautiful grand piano. It was a Steinway, polished to a shine so deep it looked like a black mirror. It was the centerpiece of the restaurant, meant to give the place a classy feel. But to Isabella, it looked lonely. During the day, sometimes a hired player would come in for a few hours to play soft jazz. But tonight, the player had canceled. The restaurant policy was to play recorded music instead, but the sound system had been glitchy all night. So the piano just sat there, silent, covered in a small layer of dust that only Isabella seemed to notice. She walked past it on her way to the kitchen. She stopped for just a fraction of a second. Her hand hovered over the sleek black lid. She wanted to lift it. She wanted to sit on that bench. She wanted to press down on the pedal and hear that deep, resonant sound that vibrates in your chest. She wanted to play something loud and angry, or something soft and sad, just to let the feelings out. She looked around the room. The diners were eating, drinking, and talking. No one was looking at the piano. No one cared about the piano. To them, it was just a piece of furniture. But to her, it was a reminder of who she used to be. "Hey, Izzy, can you take table 12? The bartender called out. Isabella pulled her hand back as if she had touched a hot stove. She put on her apron and adjusted her uniform. "Yeah, I got it," she called back. She walked away from the piano, clutching her order pad tightly. She felt a lump in her throat. She pushed the feeling down, swallowing it hard. There was no time for music. There was no time for sadness. There were only tables to clear and orders to take. She was just a waitress now. That was the story she told herself every night. And for the most part, she believed it. But as she walked toward table 12 to take another order from another stranger, the music in her head kept playing. It was a quiet song, but it was the only thing keeping her going. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change. All it would take was one moment, one mistake, and one song. But for now, she just kept walking. The heavy glass doors of the Velvet Note swung open, bringing with them a gust of cold, wet wind from the storm outside. The usual hum of the restaurant dipped for a moment as the patrons near the entrance turned to look. A tall man stepped inside, shaking a few droplets of rain from his expensive black coat. He didn't look like the usual customers who came here to gossip and laugh over appetizers. He looked like a man who was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. This was Mr. Sterling. He was a name that often appeared in the business sections of newspapers, usually next to words like tycoon, mogul, or billionaire. He owned half the skyscrapers in the downtown district and had a reputation for being tougher than steel. But tonight, he didn't look powerful. He looked exhausted. His face was pale, his eyes were dark and rimmed with red, and his jaw was set in a hard, tight line. He was here because he needed to eat, but mostly because he didn't want to go home to an empty, silent penthouse. The hostess, a young girl named Chloe, scrambled to find him a good table. She recognized him immediately and seemed nervous. "All right, this way, Mr. Sterling," she stammered, leading him to the quiet corner booth, the one with the high backs that offered privacy. He nodded once, not speaking, and slid into the leather seat. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the emails that were flooding in. His week had been a disaster. A massive merger he had spent 6 months planning was falling apart. His partners, people he had trusted for years, were threatening to back out at the last minute to get more money. It was betrayal, plain and simple. Sterling was used to fighting for what he wanted, but this time he was just tired of the fighting. Across the table sat his junior associate, a nervous young man with glasses who was fidgeting with his tie. "Sir, I tried to call the legal team again, but they aren't answering," the associate said, his voice shaking slightly. Sterling looked up from his phone. His eyes were cold. "Then call them again, David. I don't pay them to sleep." "Yes, sir." Right away, Sterling put the phone down on the table with a heavy thud and looked around the restaurant. He hated places like this. It was too loud, too bright, and too full of people pretending to be happy. He watched a group of women laughing loudly at a nearby table, clinking their champagne glasses. They looked carefree. It annoyed him. He had spent 30 years working 18 hours a day to build an empire, sacrificing his sleep, his health, and his personal life. And here he was, sitting in a bistro while his business partner stabbed him in the back. He picked up the menu, though he already knew what he wanted. He always ordered the same thing, a rare steak, spinach, and a glass of scotch. No ice. He liked routines. He liked things he could control. Suddenly, the smooth jazz music that had been playing in the background stopped. It wasn't a slow fade-out. It was a sudden, jarring cut. 1 second, there was a saxophone playing a mellow tune, and the next, there was nothing but the clatter of silverware and the murmur of voices. Sterling looked up, annoyed. The silence felt heavy. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. The manager, Mr. Higgins, rushed out from behind the bar, looking panicked. He went over to a small control panel on the wall and started pressing buttons. He tapped the side of the box, his face turning red. He tried a few more buttons, but nothing happened. The speakers remained dead. "Great," Sterling muttered under his breath. He rubbed his temples with his fingers. He had a headache pounding behind his eyes, and the sudden silence didn't help. It just made the other noises in the restaurant louder. He could hear the waiter dropping a fork in the kitchen. He could hear the high-pitched laugh of the woman at the next table. It was grating. David, the associate, looked terrified. He sat there frozen, holding his water glass with 2 hands, scared to even breathe. He knew Sterling's temper. He knew that when things went wrong, Sterling usually took it out on the people closest to him. "Is the food coming soon?" David asked the waiter, trying to be helpful but sounding weak. The waiter, a young guy who looked overwhelmed, nodded. "Yes, sir." "The kitchen is backed up a bit, but it won't be long." Sterling leaned back in his booth and crossed his arms. He stared at the empty dance floor near the grand piano in the corner. That piano was the only thing in the room he actually liked. It was a beautiful instrument. He used to play when he was a boy before life got too busy. He remembered sitting on a bench in his mother's living room, learning scales. But that felt like a lifetime ago. That belonged to a different person who still believed in simple things. Now, the piano just sat there. It looked lonely without a player. "I need this drink," Sterling said to himself. He signaled for the waiter. Mr. Higgins was still pacing near the wall, looking like he might pull his hair out. He was whispering into a walkie-talkie, presumably calling the maintenance guy or the sound technician. But it was late Tuesday night, and Sterling knew that nobody was coming to fix a speaker system at this hour. They were going to have to eat in silence. The awkwardness in the room was spreading. People were starting to look around, noticing the lack of music. Conversations seemed to be dropping in volume because everyone could hear each other now. The vibe of the restaurant, the thing that made people pay high prices for average food, was gone. It felt like a cafeteria. Sterling took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find a moment of peace in the chaos of his mind. He thought about the deal. He thought about the money. He thought about how lonely it was at the top. Everyone wanted something from him. His partners wanted more shares. His employees wanted raises. His family wanted loans. No one just wanted to sit and talk. When he opened his eyes, his gaze landed on Isabella. She was walking by with a tray full of dirty dishes. She looked tired, just like he felt. He watched her wipe a strand of hair out of her face. She didn't look at the patrons with admiration or envy like the other staff members did. She just looked focused on surviving the shift. Sterling found himself wondering about her. Did she have dreams? Did she hate her job? Or was she just happy to have a paycheck? He envied her in a strange way. Her problems were probably simple. Rent, groceries, maybe a car payment. His problems were millions of dollars in broken trusts. Sometimes simple problems were easier to solve. Suddenly, a loud crash of thunder rattled the windows outside. The lights in the restaurant flickered for a second. David gasped and dropped his fork. "For crying out loud!" Sterling snapped, slamming his hand on the table. The loud noise made a few people jump. He immediately regretted it. He wasn't angry at David. He wasn't angry at the thunder. He was angry at himself. He was angry that he couldn't just enjoy a simple meal without his mind racing a mile a minute. He needed something to break the tension. He needed a distraction. The silence was unbearable. It was forcing him to think too much. Mr. Higgins walked by his table, looking pale. "I am so terribly sorry, Mr. Sterling," the manager said, his voice trembling slightly. "We are having a technical issue with the sound system. I am trying my best to resolve it." Sterling looked at him. The manager looked terrified of losing a big customer. Sterling could sense fear. It was a smell he had grown used to. He thought about being cruel. He thought about demanding a refund or threatening to leave a bad review. It was what people expected him to do. It was what Mr. Sterling would do, but he was too tired to be cruel. "Just fix it," Sterling said, his voice low but not shouting. "Or bring me my scotch. Make it a double." Higgins nodded quickly and rushed off. Sterling turned his attention back to the piano. It sat there, dark and shiny. He almost wished he knew how to play again. He almost wished he could walk over there and pound out his frustration on the keys. But he couldn't. His fingers were made for signing contracts and holding phones, not for music anymore. He was a man of business now, not art. That part of him had died a long time ago. He checked his watch. 8:15 p.m. The night felt like it was dragging on forever. He watched the rain sliding down the window pane, blurring the city lights outside. He felt trapped. Trapped in the restaurant, trapped in the silence, and trapped in his life. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. He saw Mr. Higgins walk over to Isabella. The manager was talking fast, waving his hands toward the piano. Isabella was shaking her head, looking nervous. She was holding a rag in one hand and looked like she was trying to say no. Sterling raised an eyebrow. What was going on? He leaned forward slightly, watching the interaction. The manager seemed desperate. Isabella seemed reluctant. It was a small drama playing out in the corner of the room, but for the first time all night, Sterling was curious. He wasn't thinking about his money or his deal. He was just watching them, wondering what the manager was asking the tired waitress to do. The silence in the restaurant was getting heavier by the minute. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind that makes you uncomfortable, the kind that makes you look around to see if something is wrong. People were whispering, and the sound of forks scraping against plates seemed way too loud. The atmosphere that Mr. Higgins had worked so hard to build was crumbling, and he knew it. He could feel the panic rising in his chest, tightening his throat. He looked over at table 4, where the millionaire, Mr. Sterling, was sitting. The man looked like he was ready to explode. Higgins needed a miracle, and he needed it fast. He spotted Isabella near the service station, folding napkins. He remembered something from her interview 2 years ago. She had been nervous then, too, but when he asked about her hobbies, she had mentioned she studied music. He remembered she had played a few chords on the restaurant's old piano to test the sound during orientation. She had been good. Actually, she had been better than good. Higgins rushed over to her, nearly tripping over his own feet. "Isabella," he whispered frantically, grabbing her arm. "I need you. I need a massive favor." Isabella pulled back, startled. She looked at his face, which was flushed and sweaty. "What is it, Mr. Higgins? Did I drop an order? Is there a spill?" "No, nothing like that," he said, glancing nervously at the customers. "The sound system is dead. completely dead. The technician isn't picking up. Look at table 4. Look at Mr. Sterling. He is losing his patience. If he walks out unhappy, he could ruin this place's reputation with one bad review.
Aye.
Isabella looked over at the corner booth. The man in the black coat was rubbing his temples, looking angry and tired. Okay, Isabella said slowly, not understanding. But what can I do? I can't fix the speakers. Higgins leaned in closer. You can play the piano. Just go play something. Anything. Soft background music to fill the quiet until we can figure out the system. Just give us some ambiance. Isabella stared at him as if he had just asked her to fly to the moon. Her heart immediately started beating against her ribs like a trapped bird. She shook her head violently. No way, Mr. Higgins. I can't. Isabella, please, he begged. You told me you were at the conservatory? You have the training. Just play some jazz. Just play something nice and quiet. You don't understand? She said, her voice rising slightly before she lowered it to a whisper. That was 2 years ago. I haven't sat down at a piano since I left school. My hands are for carrying trays now. They're stiff. I'm rusty. What if I mess up? What if I hit a wrong note and everyone stares at me? They're already staring at the silence. Higgins insisted, his eyes wide with desperation. Please, just for 10 minutes. Until I can get the laptop connected to the portable speakers. Just save me, Isabella. Isabella looked back at the piano. It sat in the corner looking back at her. Under the dim spotlight, it looked beautiful and terrifying. It felt like seeing an old friend you had a fight with and hadn't spoken to in years. She felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to help Higgins. He was a good boss, even if he was stressed. But the fear was paralyzing. I don't know any background songs, she stammered. I know concertos. I know sonatas. I know big, complicated classical pieces. I don't know dinner music. Higgins grabbed her shoulders gently. It doesn't matter. Play a sonata softly. Play whatever your hands want to play. Just make it sound like music, please. I'm begging you. Isabella looked at the customers. The couple near the window was looking around awkwardly. The group of ladies had stopped laughing. The tension in the room was making it hard to breathe. She realized that Higgins was right. The silence was worse than bad music. It was ruining the night for everyone. She took a deep, shaky breath. Her hands felt cold and clammy. She wiped them on her uniform apron. Okay, she whispered, so quietly she could barely hear herself. Okay, I'll try. Thank you. Thank you. Higgins whispered, looking like he might cry. Go. Go now. Isabella untied her apron strings and pulled the heavy fabric off her body. She folded it and placed it on the counter. Suddenly, she felt exposed. Without the apron, she didn't feel like a waitress. She felt like a young woman in a black shirt and slacks walking into a lion's den. She smoothed down her hair, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. She started walking toward the corner. The distance between the service station and the piano was only about 20 feet. But to Isabella, it felt like a mile. With every step, her doubts got louder. Asterisk, you're going to embarrass yourself. You're going to forget the notes. Everyone is going to laugh. They're going to know you're a fraud. Asterisk, she could feel the eyes of the diners on her as she moved. They weren't looking at her with admiration. They were looking with curiosity. They were wondering why the waitress was walking toward the instrument. She saw Mr. Sterling look up. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked confused. Isabella reached the bench. It was polished wood, cold to the touch. She stood there for a moment, staring at the keys. They were black and white, arranged in the familiar pattern that was burned into her brain. It looked exactly the same as it did in her dreams. She sat down slowly. The bench was a little lower than she liked, so she reached underneath to adjust the knob. It squeaked loudly in the quiet room. Someone at a nearby table giggled. Isabella felt her face turn hot with embarrassment. She wanted to stand up and run back to the kitchen. Don't run, she told herself. Just breathe. She placed her hands in her lap. She closed her eyes for a second and tried to imagine she was back in the practice room at school. The smell of the dusty books, the quiet hum of the air conditioner, She tried to remember who she was before the debt and the grief. She was a player. That was her identity. She opened her eyes and lifted her hands. She hovered them over the keys, unsure of where to start. She felt like her fingers were made of lead. Then she thought of her father. She thought of how much he loved to hear her play. She thought of how sad and angry Mr. Sterling looked. The world seemed full of heavy emotions tonight. She needed to let some of them out, without thinking too hard. Her fingers found the starting notes of a piece she knew better than her own name. It was a nocturne by Chopin. It was a song meant for the night, full of sadness and beauty. It was perfect for the rain outside and the tired people inside. She pressed down on the first key. The sound was clear and bell-like. It's cutting through the heavy air of the room. Then came the second note, and the third. She started slow, her voice trembling just a little bit. She was expecting her hands to feel stiff and awkward, but as she played the first few measures, something magical happened. Her fingers remembered what her mind had forgotten. The muscle memory took over. Her left hand began to play the rolling rhythm, deep and steady like a heartbeat. Her right hand began to weave the melody, soft and singing. It wasn't perfect. Her timing was a tiny bit shaky at first, and her touch was a little hesitant. But as she continued to play, the fear began to melt away. She was no longer Isabella, the waitress who was worried about rent. She was Isabella, the musician. The music flowed out of her, carrying all the stress of the last 2 years. Every missed opportunity, every long shift. Every night she cried herself to sleep, it all went into the keys. The sound of the piano was rich and full, filling every corner of the restaurant. It was so much better than the recorded jazz they usually played. It was alive. It had feeling. Isabella stopped thinking about the people watching her. She forgot about the millionaire in the corner. She forgot about Mr. Higgins. The world shrank down to just the keys and the sound. She closed her eyes, letting her hands run up and down the ivories. She played a little louder now, letting the emotion swell. She wasn't holding back anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. The heavy weight on her chest lifted, replaced by the vibration of the music. She didn't know it yet, but the entire restaurant had stopped eating. They were listening. But in that moment, she was just a girl playing the piano, letting her soul speak for her. The sound that flowed from the piano wasn't just music. It was like a living thing that filled the entire room. At first, it was just a gentle stream, but as Isabella's confidence grew, the music became a river. The melody was deep and emotional, pouring out of the instrument and wrapping around the tables, the walls, and the people. It was a classical piece, complex and sophisticated, but played with a raw kind of honesty that you don't hear very often. The change in the room didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. At the table near the window, the man who had been shouting into his phone slowly lowered his voice. Without realizing it, he stopped arguing. The words died in his throat because the music was more important than the conversation. He ended the call with a mumbled goodbye and just sat there, listening. Across the room, the group of women who had been laughing loudly fell silent. They weren't laughing anymore. They were leaning forward in their chairs, their eyes fixed on the corner of the room. The clatter of silverware against plates faded away. Even the waitresses and waiters, who were usually rushing around with their heads down, began to move slower. They paused while pouring water or clearing tables, turning their ears toward the beautiful sound. The heavy, stressful atmosphere that had been choking the restaurant vanished. In its place came a feeling of peace, a feeling of awe. It was as if Isabella had cast a spell over the room, but no one was affected more than Mr. Sterling at his table. He had just picked up his fork to take a bite of his steak. The piece of meat was halfway to his mouth when the first strong chord of the music hit him. His hand froze in midair. He didn't chew. He didn't swallow. He just listened. Sterling had spent his entire life surrounded by expensive things. He owned fast cars, expensive paintings, and tailored suits. He attended galas and operas and VIP. Boxes where the musicians were world famous and highly paid. He knew what good music sounded like, but usually it felt distant to him. It was polished, perfect, and cold. It was like a product you buy in a store. This was different. This music was messy and real, was filled with a longing that made his chest hurt. He could hear the struggle in the notes. He could hear the sadness, but he could also hear the hope. It felt like someone was telling him a secret without using any words. Slowly, Mr. Sterling lowered his fork, and it made a soft clink as it landed on the plate, but he didn't notice. He pushed his plate away slightly. He wasn't hungry for food anymore. He was hungry for this sound. He turned his body in the booth, swiveling completely so he could face the piano. His eyes found Isabella. She looked different than she had 5 minutes ago. She wasn't the tired waitress with the slumped shoulders anymore. She was sitting up straight, her head tilted slightly back, her eyes closed in concentration. Her fingers danced across the keys with a speed and grace that seemed impossible. Her face was peaceful, transformed by the joy of playing. "She is unbelievable," Sterling whispered to himself. David, his young associate, was staring too. His mouth was slightly open in shock. "Sir," David whispered back, "she's incredible. I've never heard anything like that in a restaurant before." "Nor have I," Sterling said, his voice barely a breath. He watched her hands closely. I saw how she pressed the pedals with her foot, how she leaned into the high notes and pulled back on the low ones. It was a language he didn't speak, but he understood exactly what she was saying. She was saying, asterisk, "I am here. I matter. I have something to give." Asterisk. Sterling felt a strange, stinging sensation behind his eyes. He hadn't cried in 20 years, not even when his mother passed away or when his first marriage ended in a disaster. He had built a thick wall around his heart to protect himself in the business world. He thought his heart was frozen solid. But tonight, the music was melting the ice. He looked at the other people in the room. Everyone was looking at Isabella. The rich man in the expensive suit, the young couple on a date, the tired servers, they were all united by the sound. For the first time in his life, Sterling realized that money couldn't buy this moment. He couldn't write a check to make people feel this way. He couldn't sign a contract to create this kind of beauty. This was pure human talent, raw and unpolished. And it was more powerful than any business deal he had ever closed. The music began to change. It got faster, more intense. Isabella's hands were moving so fast they were almost a blur. The sound grew louder, filling the high ceiling of the restaurant. It was passionate and fiery, like a storm. Sterling gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He felt his heart beating faster, matching the rhythm of the song. He felt a sudden surge of energy, a reminder that he was alive. He thought about his own life again. He thought about the endless meetings, the greed, the betrayal, and the emptiness of his big, lonely penthouse. He looked at Isabella, this woman, who worked double shifts, who probably had financial struggles he couldn't even imagine him. Realized she possessed a wealth he didn't have. She had a soul that could fly even while her feet were stuck on the ground. I almost left, he thought, a wave of guilt washing over him. I was ready to walk out because there was no music. All along the music was right here, wearing an apron. The climax of the song was approaching. The notes were tumbling over each other, cascading down like a waterfall. The restaurant was dead silent now. You couldn't hear a single breath. Everyone was holding on, waiting to see where she would take them next. Even the kitchen staff had pushed through the swinging doors to peek out. Wiping their hands on their uniforms, listening to the magic happening in the dining room, Mr. Higgins, the manager, was standing near the wall. He had a look of relief mixed with total amazement. He caught Sterling's eye and gave a small nervous nod, as if to say, "See? I told you." Sterling didn't nod back. He just kept his eyes on the piano. He was captivated. He didn't want the song to end. He wanted to stay in this moment forever, where the only thing that mattered was the music. It was the first time in years that he wasn't thinking about work, or money, or his problems. He was just a man listening to a girl play the piano as the melody reached its peak. Sterling let out a long breath he didn't know he was holding. The cynicism that had hardened him was gone. The anger he felt toward his business partners was forgotten. In its place was a sense of wonder. He felt like a little boy again, discovering something new and amazing for the first time. He looked at Isabella's tired shoes and her simple uniform. Then he looked at the priceless Steinway piano she was playing. It was a strange, beautiful contradiction. The world was upside down. The person who should have been on stage was serving tables. All the people who had everything were just sitting there watching her. Mr. Sterling knew he would never forget this night. He knew that no matter what happened with his business deals tomorrow, this moment was real. And as the music began to slow down, signaling the end was near, he found himself leaning forward, not wanting to miss a single second of it. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was a silence filled with respect. The very last note of the song drifted into the air, soft and lingering, like a whisper that didn't want to fade away. Isabella held her hands on the keys for a moment, letting the vibration stop naturally. Her chest was heaving slightly, as if she had just run a long race. For a few seconds, the restaurant stayed in complete silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when something beautiful has just occurred, and no one wants to be the first person to break the spell. Then, a man near the front clapped his hands. Once, twice. Suddenly, the room erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a wave of noise. People started banging on their tables with their hands. Others stood up from their seats. Isabella opened her eyes, blinking rapidly, as if she was waking up from a deep dream. The bright lights of the restaurant hurt her eyes. The magic of the music vanished instantly, replaced by a cold wash of reality. She realized where she was. She wasn't on a stage in a concert hall. She was sitting in the corner of a bistro, wearing a black shirt that smelled like pasta sauce. She felt her face turn hot. Panic rose in her chest. She quickly stood up from the bench, knocking the seat back slightly. She couldn't handle the attention. She didn't want people to look at her with admiration. She just wanted to disappear. She gave a quick, awkward nod to the room and practically ran toward the kitchen. "Thank you. Thank you," she mumbled. Not looking at anyone, she pushed through the swinging doors and leaned against the cold metal counter, gasping for air. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She could hear the applause still going on in the dining room, loud and enthusiastic. Mr. Higgins came rushing into the kitchen, his face glowing. That was incredible," he shouted, throwing his hands up. "Did you hear them? They loved it. You have to go back out there. Take a bow." Isabella shook her head frantically, grabbing her apron from the counter. No, I can't. Please don't make me." "But Isabella, they are asking for you. Even Mr. Sterling is clapping." "I'm just a waitress, Higgins," she said, her voice trembling. She tied the apron strings around her waist with clumsy fingers. "I just want to do my job. Please, let me just clear some tables." Higgins looked at her, seeing the genuine fear in her eyes. He softened his voice. Okay. Take a breath. Just take a minute." But that was something special. Isabella took a deep breath, wiping her sweaty palms on her skirt. She picked up a pitcher of water and a rag. She needed to ground herself. She needed to get back to being invisible. She was terrified that if she stepped back out there, the spell would break, and people would realize she was just a tired girl with a lot of debt. She walked to the sink, splashed some cold water on her face, and forced herself to walk back into the dining room. The applause had died down, replaced by a low, excited buzz of conversation. Everyone was talking about the music. As Isabella walked toward the tables, people stopped her. "That was beautiful, honey," an older lady said, touching her arm gently. "You should be playing at the opera house," a man in a suit said. Shaking his head in disbelief, Isabella just smiled tightly, muttering "thank you" over and over again. She kept her head down, moving toward the back corner to clear a table away from the crowd. She felt exposed, like everyone was dissecting her. She reached table 12, which was empty now. She started stacking the dirty plates, trying to focus on the clinking sound of the ceramic. "Excuse me?" The voice was deep, calm, and authoritative. Isabella froze. She knew that voice. She turned around slowly. It was Mr. Sterling. He was standing right behind her. Up close, he looked even more imposing, but his eyes weren't cold anymore. They were intense, staring at her with a look she couldn't quite read. David, his associate, was standing a few feet away, looking like a scared puppy. Isabella felt a jolt of fear. I'm sorry, sir. Did you need something? Was the music too loud? I can stop if..." Sterling held up a hand to stop her. "The music was perfect," he said. His voice was gentle but firm. It was the only thing that has made sense to me all week. Isabella didn't know what to say. She just clutched the dirty rag in her hand. Thank you, sir. That's very kind. Sterling took a step closer. He looked at her hands, the red, rough hands that had just played such beautiful music hand. Then he looked into her eyes. I have a question for you, and I want you to tell me the truth. Isabella swallowed hard. Okay, why are you here? Sterling asked. He gestured around the room. Why are you clearing plates and serving water when you have a gift like that? That wasn't just playing notes. That was soul. That was years of training. Why is that talent wasted on this floor? Isabella felt a lump form in her throat. She looked down at her shoes. She hadn't explained this to anyone in a long time. She didn't want to tell a billionaire her sad story, but the look in his eyes made it impossible to lie. I had to stop, she whispered. I was at the conservatory, but my father got sick. He passed away. He had a lot of medical bills. The school was expensive, and the rent. She trailed off, shrugging her shoulders. I thought it would take a year off, just to pay the bills. But then 1 year became 2, and the debts got bigger. And now, she looked up at him, her eyes watery. And now, I think I'm just too tired. I think I lost my chance. Sterling stared at her. He didn't say anything for a long time. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away again. He looked stunned. He looked angry, but not at her. He looked angry at the situation. You didn't lose your chance, Sterling said quietly. The world just lost its mind. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather checkbook. Isabella's eyes went wide. She held up her hands. Please, she said, panicking. If this is about a tip, I appreciate it, but I can't take a check like that. And really, the playing was just for fun. Please don't. I am not giving you a tip, Sterling interrupted. He clicked a pen open with a sharp snap. I am making an investment. I don't understand, Isabella said, her voice shaking. Sterling started writing on the check. He wrote quickly, his hand moving with purpose. I have spent 40 years making money. I have bought buildings. I have bought companies. And I have bought art that sits in a warehouse collecting dust. Most of it was a waste. But tonight I heard something that was actually worth paying for. He tore the check out of the book. He didn't fold it. He held it out to her. This is for your father's debts, he said. And this, he tore out a second check, is for your tuition, and a place to live, and a new piano. Isabella stared at the pieces of paper. The numbers on them were longer than anything she had ever seen. They were so big, they looked fake. She felt her knees go weak. She had to lean on the table to keep from falling over. You can't be serious, she gasped. Why? You don't even know me. I know enough, Sterling said. I know that when I am dead and gone, my buildings will just be buildings. But music? Music stays. It makes people feel things. It makes people like me feel alive again. He tucked the checkbook back into his pocket. You don't belong in this restaurant, clearing tables. You belong on a stage. And if money is the only thing standing in your way, then consider the problem solved. Tears spilled over Isabella's cheeks, hot and fast. She couldn't stop them. She didn't wipe them away. She looked at the checks, then back at the stern face of the millionaire. He wasn't smiling. He looked deadly serious. Go back to school, Sterling commanded softly. And when you have your first concert, send me an invitation. Front row. He didn't wait for a reply. He didn't want her gratitude or her praise. He simply nodded once, turned around, and walked back toward his table. David scrambled to follow him, looking back at Isabella with his mouth still open. Isabella stood there in the middle of the restaurant, clutching 2 pieces of paper that weighed more than the world. The other diners were watching her, whispering. Some were smiling. Some were clapping again. She looked over at the piano in the corner. It was just a piece of furniture again. But the man was right. It wasn't where she belonged. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had carried trays and washed dishes for 2 years. They were trembling, but they were beautiful hands. She took a deep breath, wiping her face with the rag. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't trapped. The nightmare was over. As she looked toward the exit, she didn't see a dark, rainy street. She saw a future. She saw a stage. She saw music. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled a real, genuine smile.